The Middle East crisis expanding this Monday night. How the war is spreading. The lack of clarity about America's endgame.
This is not a so-called regime change war.
And how long this war could last. Plus, stranded Canadians wondering when they can come home.
Airspace closed, no flights going out.
And how much the conflict is driving up oil prices.
I just don't see a quick resolution to this.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The war that Israel and the United States started by launching aerial assaults on Iran is quickly expanding. And though Iran's supreme leader and many around him were killed, the country remains capable of fighting back. What happens next and how long this lasts is deeply uncertain. The U.S. and Israel have carried out thousands of strikes on Iran. Iran's Red Crescent says more than 500 people have been killed, including more than 150 people at a girls' school. Iran has responded by firing drones and missiles at Israel, where at least 10 have died, and at American bases and U.S. allies in the region. The U.S. says 6 of its service members have been killed and 18 others are seriously wounded. The U.S. president, who promised to end wars, not start them, today did not rule out sending ground troops and was vague about how long this might last.
Whatever it takes, we will always, and we have right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that.
The U.S. Secretary of Defense today said this will not be an endless war.
Unlike so many of our traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force, America, regardless of what so-called international institutions say, is unleashing the most lethal and precise air power campaign in history.
And Iran is going after its oil-rich neighbors, targeting military bases, oil refineries, and civilian areas. And today, Hezbollah in Lebanon joined the attacks. Close to a dozen countries have now been drawn in. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight.
A war expanding in many directions. Israeli airstrikes hit southern Lebanon and Beirut Monday, killing at least 50 people. The strikes in response to Hezbollah attacks on an Israeli military base. The Iran-backed Lebanese militant group launched rockets across the border in revenge for the killing of Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei. Tehran's regional foe Saudi Arabia closed its largest oil refinery after a drone attack on the Persian Gulf facility. A similar incident in Qatar has halted natural gas production there, as the country claims to have shot down 2 Iranian jets. And in the Mediterranean, an Iranian drone hit a British Air Force base in Cyprus. Conflict now being felt in the small European Union nation that hosts UK forces.
The United Kingdom was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. That decision was deliberate.
Just hours after the strike, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he will now allow US bombers to use some UK bases, but only to hit Iranian missile sites. A distinction unlikely to matter to Iran. Across the region from Dubai to Tel Aviv, people are looking skyward in fear and amazement. The pilots of 3 US F-15 jets all survived after they were mistakenly shot down by Kuwaiti air defences. But this war remains focused on Iran. US and Israeli bombs pounding the country for a third day, with no sign of de-escalation from either side.
So we set out to protect ourselves, but in so doing, we protect many others.
Iran's Interim Leadership Council met for the first time before a new supreme leader is expected to be elected. The regime, without many of its key figures, remains in place for now. Iran is mostly fighting this war alone. Its ally Russia, though, has criticised the US and Israel for attempting regime change. In 2022, Russia attempted just that in Ukraine. That war has now entered its 5th year. Donna?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Since the bombing of Iran began, President Trump has been calling up journalists, talking about different timelines and different goals of this war. It has ranged from freedom for the Iranian people to ending Iran's nuclear capability, its ballistic missile capability, and its navy. The U.S. Secretary of Defense said today this war is not a repeat of Iraq, but what it might unleash is uncertain. And in a sign of the fear of retaliation against Americans in the region, the U.S. State Department is urging Americans in 14 countries to leave if they can get a commercial flight. Jackson Proskow reports.
In his first public remarks since striking Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump outlined the goals of this unprecedented military action.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime.
Without evidence, Trump claims Iran was on the brink of developing missiles that could threaten the continental United States. He suggested the country was still a nuclear threat, despite boasting about obliterating its nuclear program in strikes last year.
They ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons.
The U.S. Secretary of State briefed congressional leaders and suggested ballistic missiles were the reason the administration chose to act.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us.
As U.S. losses mount and turmoil spreads throughout the region, the president suggested the military campaign could take at least 4 to 5 weeks. He did not say what it would take to end the war.
And we will easily prevail. We're already substantially ahead of our time projection.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it.
At the Pentagon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the defense secretary offered a sobering assessment of what lies ahead, including the likelihood of more Americans killed in combat.
We expect to take additional losses, and as always, we will work to minimize U.S. losses.
In a conflict with few defined goals and no clear endgame, the Trump administration is leaving the door open to further escalation, refusing to rule out putting U.S. troops on the ground in Iran.
We'll go as far as we need to go to advance American interests.
How far depends not just on uncertain objectives, but on the appetite among Americans for a war launched without a clear explanation.
Jackson, as the U.S. and Israel fend off this barrage of Iranian and Hezbollah missile attacks, the supply of interceptors is apparently quickly depleting. How much of a concern is that?
Well, Donna, this may be what limits the length of the U.S. operation. Stocks of those missiles are described already as being dangerously low. And if the pace of Iranian attacks continues, those missiles could start to run out in just a matter of days, not just in Israel, but in other Gulf nations, too. Iran is using high numbers of attack drones, which are relatively cheap, and those are easily exhausting supplies of multi-million-dollar American interceptor missiles. Donna, many of those missile stocks were used up during last year's 12-day war between Israel and Iran, and that inventory still hasn't been replenished.
Okay, Jackson in Washington, thanks. Canada's Prime Minister, who said in a statement Canada supports the U.S. acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and from threatening international peace and security, has wrapped up his trade mission to India and is now on his way to Australia. Before hopping on the plane for that leg of the trip, Mackenzie Gray filed this report on what was accomplished in India.
After years of frosty relations, Mark Carney has made up with India.
This is not merely the renewal of a relationship. It is the expansion of a valued partnership.
Next level partnership.
The praise laid on thick by both sides, with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi calling Carney a friend, saying he deserves the entire credit for better relations. Compliments backed up with $5.5 billion in commercial deals, the biggest selling $2.6 billion worth of Saskatchewan uranium to Indian nuclear facilities.
All of these agreements under one planet are beginning of a new prosperous relationship that will offer generational opportunities.
Canada and India also signing a new defense dialogue, deals with a country that just 3 years ago the Canadian government accused of being involved in the murder of Canadian citizen and Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, an issue the Prime Minister's office would not say if Carney brought up with Modi. Mark Carney has not taken questions from reporters while in India, cancelling a scheduled press conference due to his meetings running long with Modi.
I have raised the issue of public security,
dispatching the Foreign Affairs Minister in his place, who for the first time distanced herself with a senior government official who told reporters before the trip that India was no longer involved in murders, violence, and extortions in Canada.
The words of the senior official are not words that I personally would use.
That was Mackenzie Gray reporting. And with me now from Ottawa is our chief political correspondent, David Akin. David, it's hard to know what to make of the government's messaging on this. On the one hand, it says there's no longer any interference from the Indian government. On the other hand, maybe there still is. What's your read on this?
Well, I think what you just heard from the Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, probably the clearest messaging that we've had so far. And really all she did was distance herself from that senior government official who briefed reporters before this trip started. Now, since then, we have at least 4 Liberal MPs, including the Secretary of State for Combating Crime, Ruby Sahota, who reject that official's conclusion. And then there's CSIS, the country's counter-spy agency, told Global News Today that its threat assessment of the main perpetrators of foreign interference has not changed. And that would directly contradict that senior government official who said India was no longer a threat. Now, the one person we have not yet heard from is the Prime Minister. And as Mackenzie noted, he did not take a single question from Global News or any of the other reporters traveling with him during his entire 4 days in India.
And David, I wanted to ask you about Prime Minister Carney's support for the U.S. attack on Iran. He put out a statement very quickly after the U.S. began its air assault. And Mark Carney is being criticized for that, including by one of his own Liberal MPs.
Yep, that's true. He is taking some heat on this, Don. And remember, though, what did the Prime Minister say in Davos and elsewhere? He said, "We have to take the world as we find it, not as we would wish it to be." So my read is it seems to follow from that statement that Carney believes Canada really had little choice but to back the great power that it lives beside versus that state sponsor of terrorism, Iran. Carney's support of the U.S. also follows from his observation that he made in that Davos speech that we are in an era of great powers paying little heed to international law. Now, again, it would be nice to hear the Prime Minister himself explain this. He took no questions in India. We'll see if he takes one when he gets to Australia. Donna.
Okay. David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. Canadians have been warned to avoid travel to a number of countries in the region, and multiple airlines have already suspended hundreds of flights. That has left people already there stranded, including tens of thousands of Canadians. Heidi Petracek reports on what their options are.
This is the sky near Doha Sunday night. Iranian missiles and drones being intercepted mid-air. The city eerily quiet otherwise. Everyone urged to avoid outings. Canadians among thousands of travelers grounded here.
There was an initial warning, like morning explosions that did kind of wake some of us up, but it's been fairly quiet today.
16 Queen's University students were en route home from a field excursion in Sri Lanka when their flight was diverted to Doha, the airline covering their hotel and meals.
The professor that is with them, Stephen Lougheed, I just cannot express enough appreciation.
Jen Gordon's daughter is there too.
If any of the students are watching this news report, to just know that all of your family and friends are thinking of you every minute.
We landed just about 5 minutes before they closed the airspace.
Fitness instructor Rachel Draghi is in Kuwait. She's supposed to leave Sunday.
I haven't pursued an exit strategy. I'm assuming or hoping that the flights will be available for me to get on come Sunday.
It has implications for everybody around the world, and people should be aware, and people should have plan B and plan C's.
More than 3,000 flights were canceled after the strikes on Iran. The UAE says it's paying for hotels and meals for all affected passengers. Monday, Emirates Airlines said it would begin operating a limited number of flights by evening. Dubai airports also said they would resume limited operations. Stranded Canadians are cautious.
As much as I want to get out, there's still explosions. I don't know if it's safe to fly out.
Some feel there's been a lack of urgency from the federal government.
Every time we've talked to the embassy in Canada about the emergency,
They say they have nothing to share.
There are reports the British government may be working on potential plans to evacuate stranded UK nationals. So far, Ottawa hasn't indicated whether it's exploring the same. Global Affairs says Canadians in the region should prepare contingency plans that don't involve the government. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
The financial impact of the Middle East crisis. Coming up, what happened on the markets today and to oil prices. It was a volatile day on world markets as investors weigh the impact of the war. The price of oil surged. A barrel of Brent crude jumped to over $77 US a barrel, the highest in months. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which 20% of the world's oil supply passes through, has been shut down, and Iran is hitting oil refineries. Heather Urix-West reports on the impact on gas prices and Canada's oil industry.
An oil tanker on fire off of Oman's coast on the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Smoke rising from Saudi Arabia's largest refinery after a drone strike forced it to shut down. The scenes of chaos across the Middle East causing global oil prices to soar.
I just don't see a quick resolution to this. And it's such a oil-prone area with, 20% of the world's oil moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is unlikely to roll over.
Located between Oman and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz is considered the world's most important oil choke point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea. Every day, 20 million barrels of crude come through this strait. That's 5 times what Canada currently exports.
We're here to help, but part of the way in which we can help is, of course, with expansions to the West Coast pipelines.
A surging oil price is good news for the Alberta government as it pushes for a new pipeline and deals with an almost $10 billion deficit thanks to what had been a slumping price in crude.
We are predicting budget 26 and ending this year that every dollar change in the price of WTI was about a $680 million impact.
After dropping below $60 a barrel last spring, oil prices surged to a high in 2025 after the U.S. attacked 3 nuclear facilities in Iran on June 22nd. But once the region stabilized, prices fell steadily through the rest of the year. The current surge in price looking very similar to last June's peak, though if Persian Gulf supply is disrupted for a prolonged period, prices could climb even higher.
Gas prices across Canada set to rise anywhere from 8 to 13 cents a litre over the next week or two.
The price of natural gas is up sharply too after Qatar stopped production Monday, the country accounting for 20% of the world's supply of liquefied natural gas. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
FIFA tourism ahead. Why Canada is a safe bet for soccer fans this summer. Iran's soccer team is supposed to play in the World Cup that Canada, the U.S. and Mexico are hosting this summer. That is now in doubt. As well, the U.S. is imposing visa restrictions on multiple countries, and Mexico's drug cartels are increasingly violent. And that all means Canada could be the safest bet for soccer fans, as Eric Sorensen explains.
3 countries, 48 teams.
The promos from FIFA and the 3 host nations promise a whirlwind experience for the World Cup. There have never been so many nations playing or so many cities for visitors to choose from. But
we're getting them the hell out of here fast.
U.S. President Trump's crackdown on undocumented immigrants, restrictions on visas, and now waging war in the Middle East may cause some visitors to think twice. Meantime, recent images of violence in Mexico and heightened security after the death of a drug cartel leader have raised concerns, say some tourism operators, making Canada a preferred location for World Cup travelers.
They want to go to peaceful destination. So where the Canada is emerging as a best destination for the FIFA World Cup travelers.
People coming to Canada for the World Cup will likely reflect 2 recent trends: more overseas visitors, fewer Americans. Trips to Canada by U.S. residents were down 2.9% last year, but visits from overseas residents were up 7.5%. Chilly relations with the U.S. is one reason. But Vancouver and Toronto should see a surge in international visitors this year anyway. With 13 World Cup games, Vancouver will host teams from Australia, Europe, the Middle East. Toronto will see Germany, teams from Africa, Latin America, and still more to be added to the list. The 2 Canadian cities, exceptionally diverse, should be a hot ticket worldwide.
travelers are often looking for places that they will feel welcome, they will feel safe. It's high on the consideration set. And right now, Canada stands out as a place that people do feel welcome and safe.
It's not at all clear whether Iran's soccer team will play in the World Cup with all 3 of its games in the U.S. Still, millions will come to North America this summer, hoping to escape geopolitics and enjoy sports in a welcoming environment that could make Canada the destination of choice for an increasing number of World Cup fans. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Lost and found. Next, how a precious Rembrandt was rediscovered. The public will soon be able to view a long-lost Rembrandt painting. For years, its whereabouts were unknown. Turns out it was in a private home, and now it's on loan to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Researchers spent 2 years studying it and authenticated it as a genuine work by Rembrandt. It's called Vision of Zacharias in the Temple. Its exact value is not known, but the record paid for a Rembrandt at auction is more than 36 million Canadian. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Goobies in Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.